Jake Murphy looked at the red numbers on his test screen. Every single section showed the same result: failed. He had tried 3 times to pass the entrance exam for the Galactic Defense Academy. 3 times he had walked into that white room filled with floating screens and alien technology. 3 times he had come out with nothing but shame. Around him, other humans celebrated their success. They hugged each other and talked about which ships they would serve on. They spoke of defending Earth and protecting the colonies scattered across distant stars. Jake sat alone in his chair, staring at the results that crushed his dreams. The test room emptied slowly. Soon only Jake remained, still looking at his scores. Mathematics, failed. Physics, failed. Tactical thinking, failed. Alien languages, failed. Even basic space navigation showed a big red mark next to his name. A tall figure approached his desk. The Xanthari instructor had silver skin that gleamed under the lights. 4 arms moved with perfect grace as he collected data tablets from empty desks. His large black eyes showed no emotion as he looked down at Jake. "Mr. Murphy," the alien said in perfect English. His voice sounded like metal touching glass. "This is your 3rd attempt. Academy rules are clear. No more chances." Jake nodded but did not look up. "I understand. Perhaps you should think about other work. The outer colonies need farmers. Transport ships need cargo handlers. Not everyone can be a soldier." The Xanthari's words cut deep. "Humans are still new to space. Most of your species lacks the mental capacity for advanced military service." The instructor walked away, his 4 arms carrying tablets and leaving Jake alone with his failure. The test room grew quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Jake finally stood up and walked toward the exit. Outside the Academy building, Europa Station buzzed with activity. Humans, Xanthari, Kelvani, and other alien species moved through wide corridors. Ships arrived and departed through massive docking bays. The station served as humanity's main training center and diplomatic outpost. Jake found Amy Collins waiting for him near the transport hub. She had been his friend since childhood on Earth. Unlike Jake, Amy had passed her test with excellent scores. Tomorrow she would begin training to become a ship commander. "Jake," she said softly, "I heard about your results." He tried to smile. "Congratulations on passing. You always were the smart one." Amy touched his arm. "There are other ways to serve. You could work on supply ships or help build new colonies. The galaxy needs all kinds of people. But not soldiers like me," Jake replied. The Xanthari instructor made that very clear. They walked together through the station's lower levels. These areas housed older shops, small restaurants, and service centers that tourists rarely visited. Jake had grown to know these places well during his months of studying for the academy tests. As they talked, Jake noticed a corridor he had never seen before. A small sign read, "Historical Archives, Level 7. Amy needed to return to her quarters to prepare for tomorrow's orientation, so Jake decided to explore alone. The archive section felt different from the rest of the station. Dust covered some surfaces and the lights were dimmer. Old computer terminals lined the walls, many showing data that looked decades old. The air smelled of metal and forgotten time. An elderly human man looked up from a desk covered with data tablets and printouts. He had gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. His clothes were simple work coveralls with a name tag that read, "Ben Torres, Archivist." "Well now," Ben said with surprise. "Don't get many visitors down here. You lost, son?" Jake looked around the quiet room filled with old machines and stacks of files. "Maybe, I was just walking around." "That's an academy uniform," Ben noticed. "How did your testing go?" "I'd 3 times. Jake slumped into an empty chair. "I guess I'm not cut out for defending humanity." Ben studied Jake's face for a moment. "Mind if I ask what you wanted to do?" "If you had passed, I mean. Serve on a defense ship. Protect Earth and the colonies. Make sure humanity has a place among the stars." Jake shook his head. "Sounds stupid now." "Doesn't sound stupid at all," Ben said firmly. "Been working in these archives for 40 years. Seen a lot of humans come and go. The ones who care the most don't always score the highest on tests." Jake looked around at the old equipment and files. "What kind of work do you do down here?" "I keep records. Human history, first contact reports, diplomatic files. All the paperwork that makes the galaxy run." Ben gestured to the computers around them. "Most people think it's boring work, but I find it fascinating." "What's fascinating about old files?" Ben smiled and turned to his main computer. "Let me show you something." These are communication records from when humans first met the major alien powers, the Xanthari, the Kelvani, the Morphic Collective. The screen showed translated documents and audio files. Jake could see diplomatic messages, trade agreements, and military treaties. Most were written in formal language that was hard to understand. See this pattern? Ben pointed to several documents. Every major species in the galaxy treats humans the same way. They think we're primitive, useful for simple labor, but not much else. They're probably right, Jake said bitterly. I can't even pass a basic academy test. Or maybe the tests are designed for minds that think differently than human minds. Ben pulled up more files. I've been studying these alien species for decades. They're all very advanced, very logical, but sometimes I wonder if they've forgotten something important. Like what? Ben leaned back in his chair. Hard to explain, but every now and then I read old reports from human explorers or soldiers, times when they faced impossible odds but somehow won anyway. The alien reports always describe these events as irrational human behavior, or primitive responses. Jake listened as Ben talked about humans who had fought off alien pirates with broken ships, or colonists who had survived on worlds that should have killed them. The reports were buried in files that few people ever read. The thing is, Ben continued, these aliens are so advanced that they've evolved past certain instincts, things that humans still have. What kind of instincts? Ben smiled mysteriously. The kind that makes someone keep fighting when logic says they should give up. The kind that made our ancestors survive when bigger, stronger predators wanted to eat them. Jake felt something stir inside him as he listened. Maybe his failure at the academy was not the end of everything. Maybe there were other ways to serve humanity among the stars. Would you like to learn more? Ben asked. I could use help organizing these files, and there's a lot here that might interest you. Jake looked around the quiet archive room, then back at the old man who seemed to see something in him that others missed. Yes, I'd like that very much. Jake spent the next 3 weeks working with Ben in the archives. Every morning he came down to level 7 and helped organize files that had been gathering dust for years. Ben taught him how to use the old computer systems and read diplomatic documents that most people never saw. The work was more interesting than Jake had expected. Ben showed him records from humanity's first contact with alien civilizations 50 years ago. Jake read reports from explorers who had met the Xanthari on distant worlds, and diplomats who had negotiated Earth's entry into the Galactic Council. Look at this, Ben said one morning, pulling up a file on his main screen. This is from the first meeting between humans and the Xanthari High Command. Jake read the translated document. The Xanthari had described humans as a young species with limited intellectual development and suitable for basic labor tasks, under proper supervision. The report recommended that humans be given small roles in galactic society but kept away from important decisions. They thought we were like children, Jake said. Still do, Ben replied. All the major powers feel the same way. The Xanthari, the Kelvani, the Morphic Collective. They see humans as useful but not truly intelligent. Ben opened another file. This one contained brain scans and psychological reports from various alien species. The data was complex, but Ben had learned to read it over the years. Here's what's interesting, Ben explained. These species are all very old. The Xanthari have been spacefaring for over 50,000 years. The Kelvani have had advanced technology for 30,000 years. They've had time to evolve in ways humans haven't. Jake studied the brain scans. The alien neural patterns looked very different from human ones. Certain areas that were active in human brains appeared dark or missing in the alien scans. What does this mean? Jake asked. It means they've changed, evolved past certain ways of thinking and feeling. Look at this section here. Ben pointed to a part of the Xanthari brain scan. In humans, this area controls what we call fight-or-flight responses. Basic survival instincts. In the Xanthari, it's almost completely inactive. They don't feel fear. They don't feel a lot of things that humans consider normal. Fear, anger, desperate courage, the refusal to give up when all hope is lost. They've evolved beyond what they consider primitive emotions. Ben pulled up more files showing similar patterns in other species. The Kelvani had eliminated what their own scientists called irrational emotional responses through thousands of years of genetic modification. The Morphic Collective, a hive mind species, had never developed individual survival instincts at all. So they're more advanced than us, Jake said. In some ways, yes. But in other ways, Ben paused and looked thoughtful. Jake, what would you do if you were cornered by something much bigger and stronger than you? Fight back, I guess. Even if I couldn't win. Exactly. But these species don't think that way anymore. If they face superior force, they calculate the odds, make logical decisions, and usually retreat or surrender. They've lost the ability to do something truly desperate. Ben opened a new file that contained linguistic analysis data. The screen showed words and symbols from various alien languages, along with notes about their meanings and origins. I've been working on this project for years, Ben said, studying how alien languages have changed over time. And I found something very interesting. The data showed ancient forms of Zenthari, Kelvani, and Morphic collective languages compared to their modern versions. Jake could see that many words had been removed or changed over thousands of years. These species have systematically eliminated certain concepts from their languages, Ben explained. Words that describe emotions or actions they consider primitive or dangerous. What kind of words? Ben highlighted several examples on the screen. Words for desperate courage. Terms that describe fighting when you should logically retreat. Concepts related to the fury of the weak against the strong. Jake read the translations. In ancient Zenthari, there had been words for the rage that makes small things dangerous, and the madness that brings victory to the defeated. These words no longer existed in modern Zenthari language. They can't even talk about these ideas anymore, Ben said. The concepts have been erased from their culture. But humans still have these feelings? Oh yes. Humans are still very much in touch with what these aliens consider primitive instincts. We still feel the urge to fight impossible odds. We still get angry when we're dismissed or threatened. We still refuse to give up even when logic says we should. Ben turned in his chair to face Jake directly. The Academy tests measure logical thinking, mathematical ability, technical knowledge. All things that the major alien powers value, but they don't measure the things that make humans unique. Jake thought about his failed tests and the Zenthari instructor's dismissive words. So I failed because I think like a human? You failed because the tests weren't designed for human minds. They were designed to find humans who think like aliens. Ben smiled. But what if thinking like a human is actually an advantage? Ben opened one more file, this one marked with security warnings that Jake had never seen before. I need to show you something, but you have to promise to keep it secret. Jake nodded. The file contained incident reports from across the galaxy. Jake read accounts of human merchants who had fought off pirates with damaged ships, human colonists who had survived on worlds that killed other species, human explorers who had escaped from situations that should have been impossible. Every one of these reports ends the same way, Ben said. The aliens involved describe human behavior as irrational, primitive, or impossible to predict. They can't understand why humans don't follow logical patterns. Because we don't always think logically? Because we think with more than just logic. We feel things they've forgotten how to feel. We do things they can't imagine doing. Ben leaned forward. Jake, what if that's not a weakness? What if it's a weapon? Jake stared at the files full of human successes that had been dismissed as primitive luck. He thought about all the times humans had been underestimated, ignored, or written off as unimportant. You're saying that being human gives us an advantage? I'm saying that being human gives us something the most advanced species in the galaxy don't have anymore. Something they can't understand or predict. Ben saved his files and locked his computer. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge? Jake looked around the archive room filled with forgotten records and hidden truths. For the first time since failing his academy tests, he felt like he had found something important, something that might matter more than exam scores or alien approval. We learn more, Jake said. We figure out exactly what makes humans different. And maybe we find a way to use it. Ben smiled and pulled out a new stack of files. Then let's get to work. I have a feeling we're going to need this information sooner than we think. Jake's education in the archives continued for another month. While Amy Collins learned advanced weapon systems and space tactics at the academy, Jake studied something far more unusual. Ben taught him to read alien psychology reports, analyze linguistic evolution, and understand the mental patterns of species that ruled the galaxy. The more Jake learned, the more disturbing the picture became. The major alien powers had not just evolved beyond primitive emotions, they had actively removed them from their societies. The Zenthari had used genetic therapy to eliminate what they called uncontrolled aggression responses from their population. The Kelvani had banned certain emotional expressions as forms of mental illness. The Morphic Collective had never developed individual anger at all. "Look at this medical report," Ben said, showing Jake brain scans from a Zenthari hospital. "This patient was brought in because he showed signs of what humans would call normal anger. The doctors treated it as a serious neurological disorder." Jake studied the scans. The alien's brain showed activity in areas that would be perfectly normal for a human feeling frustrated or threatened. But the Zenthari medical team had used drugs and therapy to suppress these responses completely. "They literally can't feel rage anymore," Jake said. "Worse than that, they can't understand it when they see it in others. It's like showing a blind person a painting. The concept doesn't exist in their minds." Ben pulled up more files. "I've found similar patterns in every major species. They've all eliminated the psychological tools that helped their ancestors survive." Ben had been working on a special project during their time together. He called it his linguistic archaeology, digging up words and concepts that ancient alien civilizations had buried and forgotten. His computer showed charts mapping how alien languages had changed over thousands of years. "Every language tells a story," Ben explained. "In this case, it's the story of civilizations that decided certain ideas were too dangerous to keep." The charts showed words being removed from alien vocabularies over time. Terms for desperate courage disappeared first, followed by concepts related to fighting against impossible odds. Words describing the fury of the weak against the strong vanished completely from modern alien languages. "But here's the amazing part," Ben said, highlighting a section of his research. "These words didn't just disappear randomly. They were all variations of the same basic concept, something so fundamental that every species had a word for it in their ancient past." Jake looked at the data. Despite coming from completely different alien cultures, the removed words all seemed to describe the same psychological state. A moment, when normal thinking stopped and something deeper took over, a switch that turned prey into predator. "What did they call it?" Jake asked. Ben smiled and opened his most secret file. Years of research had led him to identify the root concept that connected all these lost words. He had even figured out how it would have been pronounced in the ancient languages. In Old Zenthari, it was something like Kethmor. In ancient Kelvani, Vashthun. In the original Morphic language, deep rage of small ones. But they all meant the same thing. Which was? The moment when a cornered animal stops running and turns to fight. The psychological transformation that makes the weak suddenly dangerous. The rage that doesn't care about odds or logic or survival. Ben paused. The thing that happens inside humans when they decide they'd rather die fighting than live surrendering. Jake felt something stir inside him as Ben spoke. He had felt that emotion himself during his failed academy tests, when the Zenthari instructor had dismissed him, when he realized that the galaxy saw his entire species as inferior. "Humans still have this feeling," Jake said. "Humans never lost it. We're still close enough to our primitive ancestors that we can access that kind of desperate fury. But the major alien powers have evolved so far beyond it that they can't even remember what it feels like." Ben turned to a new screen that showed psychological analysis data. "I've been studying human behavior in crisis situations. When humans are truly cornered, truly desperate, something amazing happens. They stop thinking logically and start fighting with pure instinct. The data showed examples from human history. Soldiers who had held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. Explorers who had survived in conditions that should have killed them. Ordinary people who had performed extraordinary acts when everything seemed lost. The aliens always describe these events as irrational human behavior," Ben said. "They can't understand why humans don't calculate odds and make logical decisions like they do. To them, desperate courage looks like madness." "So this ancient word," Jake said slowly, "it describes something that only humans can still feel? Something that only humans can still access at will. The major alien species might feel it if they were in mortal danger, but they've suppressed those neural pathways so completely that it would take extreme trauma to trigger them." Ben leaned back in his chair. "But a human could feel it just by choosing to." Jake thought about this for a long moment. "You're talking about weaponizing human emotion. I'm talking about using the one advantage humans have that no one expects. Every alien power in the galaxy has studied human technology, human tactics, human logic, but none of them understand human rage. Ben showed Jake more files containing military analysis from various alien species. The reports all came to the same conclusion. Humans were predictable in combat because they followed the same logical patterns as other species. They would retreat when outnumbered, surrender when defeated, and negotiate when faced with superior force. But what if they're wrong? Ben asked. What if humans could access something that would make them completely unpredictable? Something that would turn every engagement into a desperate fight where logic doesn't matter? Jake stared at the screens full of data and research. This ancient word you found, could it actually work? Could saying it somehow trigger that kind of response? Language shapes thought more than most people realize. In ancient cultures, certain words were considered to have real power. They weren't just sounds, they were keys that unlocked specific mental states. Ben turned to face Jake directly. I think this word might be one of those keys, a way to access the desperate courage that these aliens have forgotten. Have you tried it? Ben shook his head. I'm just an old archivist. I understand the concept intellectually, but I don't feel it. This word isn't meant for people like me. He looked at Jake seriously. It's meant for people who have been dismissed, underestimated, told they're not good enough. People who have something to prove. Jake felt that familiar anger rising inside him. The memory of his failed tests, the Zenthari instructor's contempt, the galaxy's dismissal of human potential. But now the anger felt different. Instead of making him feel weak and defeated, it made him feel dangerous. Teach me the word, Jake said. Ben hesitated. Jake, this isn't just about pronunciation. If I'm right about what this represents, once you speak it, there's no going back. The galaxy will see humans differently. You'll see yourself differently. The galaxy already sees humans as inferior. Maybe it's time to change that. Jake looked around the archive room where he had learned so many hidden truths. Maybe it's time to remind everyone that the weak can be the most dangerous of all. Ben nodded slowly and turned to his computer. Then let me teach you how to pronounce the word that ended civilizations. The alarm began at 0600 station time. Jake was in the archives with Ben, practicing the pronunciation of the ancient word they had discovered. The sound was difficult for human vocal cords to make. Part growl, part scream, part something deeper than either. Ben had spent weeks teaching Jake the proper tones and emphasis that would carry the word's full psychological impact. The emergency sirens made them both look up from their work. Red lights flashed throughout the archive room as automated voices announced a station-wide alert. Ben quickly turned to his communications console to access the emergency broadcast network. This is Admiral Kate Phillips of the Terran Defense Fleet. A woman's voice crackled through the speakers. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Jake and Ben rushed to the main viewports in the archive section. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see space filled with ships unlike anything in the Galactic database. The vessels were massive and dark, with organic-looking curves that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Energy weapons fired in colors that hurt to look at directly. What are those things? Jake asked. Ben was already working at his computer, accessing military databases and communication networks. Information flooded the screens as reports came in from across the solar system. The attacking ships had appeared without warning, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation around Earth and its colonies. They call themselves the hegemony. Ben read from an intercepted communication. They're saying that humanity's inclusion in the galactic community was a mistake that must be corrected. Jake watched through the viewport as human defense ships engaged the alien attackers. The battle was hopeless from the start. The hegemony vessels cut through human shields like they were made of paper. Weapons that should have damaged enemy hulls simply disappeared into some kind of absorption field. Where are the Zenthari? The Calvani? Jake asked. They're supposed to help defend council members. Ben's face grew dark as he read more communications. They're retreating. All of them. The major powers are pulling their forces back to protect their own territories. Amy Collins' voice suddenly came through Jake's personal communicator. She was calling from the Academy training ships that had been pressed into emergency service. Jake, are you seeing this? These things are destroying everything. Our weapons barely scratch them. Where are you? Jake asked. Moving to intercept near Mars. Admiral Phillips is gathering every ship she can find for a final stand. Amy's voice carried fear and determination in equal measure. Jake, if we don't stop them here, they'll reach Earth in 6 hours. Through the viewport, Jake could see more hegemony ships arriving. The enemy fleet grew larger every minute while human forces were being systematically destroyed. Europa Station shuddered as nearby explosions sent shockwaves through space. Ben was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. His screen showed diplomatic channels buzzing with activity as the major alien powers discussed the situation. Jake read the translated messages with growing anger. Acceptable losses was how the Zenthari High Command described 30 billion human lives. The Calvani Council called the invasion regrettable but necessary for galactic stability. The Morphic Collective simply stated that the inclusion of primitive species was always a temporary measure. They're going to let us die, Jake said. Worse than that, Ben replied, pulling up strategic analyses from alien military computers. They think we deserve it. According to these reports, the hegemony represents a level of technological advancement that makes even the council powers look primitive. Rather than risk a war they might lose, they're sacrificing humanity to appease the attackers. A new alarm sounded as hegemony boarding craft approached Europa Station. Through the station's internal cameras, Jake could see alien soldiers moving through the docking bays. They were tall and thin, wearing armor that seemed to be made of living metal. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, like parts of a single organism. Ben, Jake said urgently, your word, the one we've been practicing. Could it work against these things? The old archivist looked at his research data with uncertainty. I don't know. The hegemony might be even more advanced than the council species. They could be so far evolved beyond primitive emotions that the word would have no effect at all. But our people are dying right now, Jake pressed. Admiral Phillips is making a last stand with whatever ship she has left. Amy is out there facing impossible odds. Isn't it worth trying? Ben hesitated, then began typing rapidly at his console. There's a way to broadcast across all communication frequencies simultaneously. It would reach every ship in the system. Human, alien, everyone in range. Jake watched the tactical displays showing human forces being obliterated. Red icons representing human ships winked out one by one as the hegemony fleet advanced toward Earth. In a few hours, it would all be over. Do it, Jake said. Ben's fingers moved across the controls, setting up a system-wide broadcast. Jake, you need to understand what this means. If you speak that word over an open channel, every species in the galaxy will hear it. They'll know that humans have access to something they thought was extinct. Maybe it's time they knew. Once this happens, there's no going back. The galaxy will never see humanity the same way again. We'll be feared instead of dismissed. Jake thought about the Zenthari instructor who had told him he wasn't good enough. He thought about the alien powers who were willing to watch his species die, rather than risk their own safety. He thought about 30 billion humans who had done nothing wrong except exist in a galaxy that considered them inferior. Good, Jake said. I'm tired of being dismissed. Ben finished his preparations and turned to face Jake. Remember, the word isn't just a sound. It has to come from something real inside you, something desperate and angry and absolutely refusing to give up. Jake nodded and stood before the communications array. Through the viewport, he could see hegemony ships moving closer to Europa Station, their weapons charged with energy that made space itself seem to bend and twist. All frequencies are open, Ben announced. Every ship in the system will hear this. Jake thought about everything that had led to this moment. His failures at the academy, the dismissive words of alien instructors, the galaxy's willingness to sacrifice humanity without a second thought. But most of all, he thought about the human instinct that Ben had taught him to understand, the refusal to go quietly into extinction. He opened his mouth and spoke the ancient word. The sound that came out was unlike anything he had ever made before. It carried within it the fury of every underdog who had ever refused to surrender, the rage of the weak who chose to fight rather than submit, the primal scream of a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of the food chain and would not be pushed back down. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Across the solar system, alien crews found themselves experiencing emotions they had no way to understand. On the communication channels, Jake could hear Zenthari officers crying out in confusion as unfamiliar feelings flooded their minds. Kelvani commanders struggled to maintain control as they experienced rage for the first time in their species' recorded history. But the human crews heard something different. They heard a call to something ancient and indestructible in their nature. Admiral Phillips's voice came across the channels, no longer defensive but filled with deadly intent. "All human vessels," she commanded. "Attack formation. No retreat. No surrender. Make them pay for every inch." The word echoed through space on every communication frequency in the solar system. Jake had spoken it with all the fury and desperation he could summon, and now it rippled outward like a stone thrown into still water. But instead of disturbing water, it disturbed minds that had not felt such emotions for thousands of years. On the bridge of the Zenthari command ship, officers collapsed at their stations. The word had triggered neural pathways that their species had not used since their primitive ancestors hunted in packs on their homeworld. Commander Zeth Cole tried to maintain control, but his forehands shook uncontrollably as unfamiliar rage flooded his consciousness. "What is happening to us?" he asked his crew, but they could not answer. They were experiencing something their language had no words to describe. Their medical officers, trained to deal with every known psychological condition, found themselves helpless against an emotion that officially did not exist. The Kelvani fleet fared no better. Their ships had been maintaining a safe distance from the battle, ready to retreat if the hegemony turned on them. But when Jake's word reached their crews, something broke inside their collective consciousness. The Kelvani were a peaceful species that had eliminated violence from their society through careful genetic modification. Now they felt murder in their hearts for the first time in 8,000 years. Captain Velthis of the Kelvani flagship tried to issue orders, but her voice came out as an animal growl. Her crew was experiencing what ancient Kelvani texts called the madness of the cornered beast. They had no training for such feelings, no cultural framework to understand what was happening to them. The Morphic Collective's response was the most dramatic of all. As a hive mind species, they shared all thoughts and emotions instantly across their entire network. When Jake's word reached them, it infected their collective consciousness like a virus. Individual morphic drones began acting independently for the first time in their species' history, driven by desperate fury they could not comprehend. But the humans heard something completely different. Amy Collins, fighting desperately in her training ship near Mars, felt the word strike her like lightning. Everything became clear in that instant. She was not just defending Earth, she was proving that humanity deserved to exist. Every human who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told they were not good enough was fighting through her. "All ships, follow my lead," Amy commanded, her voice carrying new authority. "We're not running anymore." Admiral Phillips heard the word from her flagship and understood immediately what was happening. She had read the old reports, the stories of humans who had fought impossible battles and won through sheer determination. Now she felt that same desperate courage flowing through her veins. "Attention all human vessels," Phillips broadcast. "This is our moment. Show them what happens when you corner the human race." The change in human tactics was instant and shocking. Ships that had been retreating suddenly reversed course and charged directly at the hegemony fleet. Human crews stopped calculating odds and started fighting with pure instinct. They rammed enemy vessels when their weapons failed. They set their own ships to explode rather than surrender. The hegemony had expected to face a logical enemy that would retreat when overwhelmed. They had fought the major galactic powers before, and always won through superior technology and tactical thinking. But they had never faced an enemy that treated every engagement as a suicide charge that might take the enemy with them. Jake watched from Europa Station as the battle turned. Human ships were still being destroyed, but now they were taking hegemony vessels with them. The alien attackers found themselves facing opponents who did not seem to care about their own survival, only about inflicting maximum damage before dying. "It's working," Ben whispered, monitoring the tactical displays. "The hegemony forces are pulling back, but the real shock came when the alien council fleets began moving again. The Zenthari, Kelvani, and Morphic Collective ships had been paralyzed by emotions they could not understand. But as the effects of Jake's word continued to work on their minds, something unexpected happened. The alien crews began to remember things their civilizations had tried to forget. Deep in their genetic memory were traces of their primitive ancestors, creatures that had fought desperately for survival before technology made such struggles unnecessary. Jake's word had awakened something that had been sleeping for millennia. Commander Zeth Cole found himself giving orders he had never thought possible. All Zenthari vessels, attack formation. We will not let these hegemony creatures believe we are weak. The Kelvani ships moved with newfound aggression, their crews experiencing the thrill of combat for the first time in their species' recorded history. Captain Veltis laughed with primal joy as her weapons found their targets. Even the Morphic Collective, despite their confusion at feeling individual emotions, began to coordinate attacks with a fury that shocked their ancient enemies. The hegemony fleet, which had expected to face civilized opponents bound by logic and protocol, suddenly found itself surrounded by forces that had abandoned all rational thinking. Human ships charged them without regard for odds. Zenthari vessels attacked with the coordination of their pack-hunting ancestors. Kelvani crews fought with the desperate fury of cornered animals. Morphic drones acted with individual initiative that should have been impossible for their species. Within hours, the hegemony fleet was in full retreat. Their advanced technology meant nothing against opponents who were willing to die to destroy them. The alien attackers had never faced such irrational, desperate courage, and they had no tactics to counter it. Jake stood in the archive room, watching the alien fleets pursue the retreating hegemony ships. Ben was already updating files and recording everything that had happened. "Jake," Ben said quietly, "do you understand what you've done? I helped save humanity? You've changed the galaxy forever." Every major species just rediscovered emotions they thought were extinct. They remembered what it feels like to fight desperately against impossible odds. Ben paused his typing. They'll never be able to forget that feeling again. Through the viewport, Jake could see alien ships moving with new purpose. The Zenthari vessels flew in attack formations their ancestors would have recognized. Kelvani ships maneuvered with aggressive patterns that their peaceful civilization had never developed. The Morphic Collective moved as individuals united by common fury, rather than shared consciousness. Amy's voice came through Jake's communicator, filled with exhaustion and triumph. "Jake, we won. I don't know how, but we won. The whole galaxy is fighting like humans now." Jake smiled as he watched the alien fleets disappear into hyperspace, chasing the hegemony forces back to wherever they had come from. The galaxy would never be the same. The major powers had tasted something they had thought was lost forever. The desperate courage of creatures fighting for survival. "What happens now?" Jake asked Ben. The old archivist smiled as he updated humanity's file in the galactic database. "Now they'll treat us as equals. Not because we're more advanced or more logical, but because we reminded them of something they had forgotten about, themselves." Jake looked at his reflection in the dark viewport and saw something different than the failed academy candidate who had walked into the archives months ago. He had found his way to serve humanity after all, not through test scores or alien approval, but by understanding what made humans unique in a galaxy of evolved civilizations. Ben saved his files and turned off his computer. "Come on, Jake, I think it's time we went upstairs and saw how the galaxy looks now that everyone remembers how to fight like their ancestors." As they walked toward the door, Jake could hear the sounds of celebration echoing through Europa Station. Humanity had survived, and in doing so, had awakened something ancient and powerful in every species that had forgotten what it meant to refuse surrender. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again.